I gave everything to my daughter: education, a home, a future, until I heard, "Your mother never built anything great." The phrase cut me like a razor. What they didn't know is that I'd reveal who was really drowning in debt. But to understand how I reached the point of exposing everything at a dinner no one would ever forget, let me tell you how it all started, how a mother who gave her life for her daughter became invisible in her eyes, and how a mother-in-law rich in appearances destroyed years of sacrifice with carefully constructed lies. You know that feeling when you've given absolutely everything of yourself, and it still wasn't enough? Well, that's exactly how I felt whenever I looked at Melissa. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I've worked my entire life as a nurse in Seattle, caring for people I didn't even know, but treated with the same warmth I'd treat my own family. And when I say I dedicated my life to my daughter, I'm not exaggerating one bit. Every penny I earned, every extra hour I worked during those endless shifts, everything was thinking about her, her future, the opportunities I never had. I wanted her to have everything, not to go through the difficulties I went through. For a long time, I thought I was doing the right thing, being the mother every child deserves. But life has a funny way of showing you that things don't always turn out as planned. And this emotional story I'm about to tell proves exactly that. I remember like it was yesterday, the day Melissa got into the University of Washington. The happiness in her eyes was priceless. You know, I didn't have much money saved, but I didn't think twice before paying the tuition and all the monthly payments that came after. I worked double shifts, accepted night shifts that left me exhausted. But it was worth it when I saw my daughter walking across campus with that smile on her face. She was my reason for living, my pride, and I'd do anything to see her. I never complained, not even when exhaustion hit hard and I could barely keep my eyes open. After all, it was my role as a mother, right? At least that's what I believed back then. I was building her future, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. Then came her first car. A used one I found at a reasonable price after searching for weeks. She needed mobility, independence, and I wanted to provide that at any cost. Next was the move to Los Angeles when she landed that dream job she'd been longing for. I paid for the moving truck, helped with the apartment deposit, bought basic furniture so she wouldn't start from scratch. Each sacrifice seemed small compared to the joy of seeing her building her life with her own hands. And when she met Aaron and decided to get married, there I was again, contributing to part of the wedding costs. It was an emotional story watching my daughter grow and achieve all that. I felt fulfilled, as if my entire purpose was being accomplished. But I had no idea what was coming, the twist that awaited me. In the beginning, gratitude was there, you know. Melissa would call me, say thank you, send me photos of how she was arranging the apartment, tell me about her new job. But as time passed, something started to change subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, the calls became rarer, shorter, colder, as if each conversation was a burden. When I asked about her life, the answers were monosyllabic, as if I was bothering her. And that hurt in a way I can't even explain properly, like a wound that won't heal. It's as if all that love I'd given had simply evaporated into thin air, and in its place emerged a cold distance. I didn't understand where it came from, or what I'd done to deserve it. My daughter was becoming a stranger to me. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that she was busy building her life and that soon things would return to normal. But the truth is that the distance only increased, day after day, week after week. When I'd visit her in Los Angeles, I felt like I was in the way, as if my presence was a burden instead of a joy. Melissa barely talked to me during visits, always in a hurry, always with something more important to do than spend time with her own mother. And I'd be there, in that apartment I helped furnish, feeling completely invisible and dispensable. It was a horrible feeling, not belonging in the place where my own daughter lived, being treated like a stranger, like someone who was no longer important in her. Each visit left me emptier, more lost, more confused about what had happened to our relationship. The conversations got even stranger when she started making comments about personal growth and building your own life without depending on anyone. At first, I thought it was nice, thought she was maturing, becoming more independent and confident, but there was something between the lines of those statements that bothered me deep, like a splinter stuck in your skin. It was as if she was insinuating that I'd never done anything relevant in my life, that my life as a nurse, my endless shifts, my constant sacrifices, all of that was worth absolutely nothing. And the worst part is she never said it directly. always stayed in those indirect comments that left me confused and hurt at the same time. I started wondering if I was being too sensitive or if there really was contempt in those words. I began questioning whether I'd done something wrong during her upbringing, if I'd spoiled her too much, if I should have been tougher. I'd spend sleepless nights replaying every decision I made, searching for the exact moment when everything started going downhill. Was it when I paid for her entire college without asking for anything in return? Should I have let her figure things out on her own, learn through difficulty like I did? But at the time, all I wanted was to help, to make her path easier so she wouldn't suffer. I never imagined that could turn against me in such a cruel and unexpected way, that my daughter could look at me with that coldness that seemed to say you're not needed here anymore. The pain of being treated as disposable by the person you love most in the world is something that cuts way too deep. And then came even more painful comments, the ones that echo in your head for days on end. During one visit, during an awkward lunch, where silence weighed more than any conversation could weigh, Melissa dropped a phrase that stayed etched in my memory. "Mom, you did what any mother would do. It was your obligation. It's not like it was anything extraordinary." I froze, fork in the air, not knowing how to respond to that. Obligation. Everything I did, all those years of hard work, giving up my own life to guarantee her future, was just an obligation. In that moment, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces inside my chest. Ingratitude hurts most when it comes from who you least expect, from who you loved unconditionally. There was my daughter, an ungrateful daughter, saying my sacrifices were nothing more than mundane obligations. But I swallowed the pain, as I always did throughout my life, and tried to continue being the present mother I'd always been. After all, she was my daughter, and mothers don't give up on their children easily, no matter how much it hurts to stay. I kept sending affectionate messages, calling occasionally, trying to maintain some kind of connection alive between us. However, each interaction left me empty, more distant from that Melissa I knew and loved so much. It was as if my daughter had been replaced by a cold and calculating version I simply didn't recognize anymore. And the worst of all is that I had no clue what had caused this radical transformation in who I'd raised. Something or someone had entered her life and completely changed her perspective about me, about our real story, about everything we'd lived together since she was born. And it was precisely in this moment of greatest confusion and pain that things started making a bit more sense. When I finally met the person who was behind all this drastic change in Melissa, a lot fell into place. I understood it wasn't about me. It was never really about who I was or what I'd done for her. There was someone influencing my daughter, constantly planting distorted ideas in her head every day, making her see our relationship in a completely wrong way, as if I were the villain of the story. And this person had a very specific reason for doing this. A selfish and manipulative reason I'd only discover later, a woman who presented herself as an example of success, but who in reality hid something very different behind the facade. Someone who was about to turn my daughter's life upside down in a way no one expected. Everything really started changing when Melissa met Aaron Thompson, a guy who seemed decent at first glance. He worked in digital marketing, had a friendly smile, and treated my daughter well, at least it seemed so. When she told me she was dating seriously, I was happy for her, despite all that distance that already existed between us. But what really caught Melissa's attention wasn't exactly Aaron, if you know what I mean. It was his mother, Catherine Thompson, a woman who entered our story like a hurricane disguised as a gentle breeze. And from the first moment I heard about her, something in my chest tightened. That feeling that things were about to get even worse. You know, like when you sense a storm's coming, but you still can't see the clouds in the sky. The first time Melissa told me about Catherine, her eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, you need to meet Catherine. She's amazing, a woman of real success," she said on the phone with an excitement that made me uncomfortable. From the description, Catherine was everything I never was. A successful businesswoman in real estate, living in Santa Monica, one of the most expensive areas in California. She constantly traveled to Napa Valley and Aspen, places I only knew from photos on the internet. She wore designer bags that cost more than my 3-month salary as a nurse, and apparently loved posting all of this on social media, creating a perfect image of success and glamour. While listening to my daughter talk, I felt that stab in my chest again, stronger this time. Catherine presented herself as a real estate magnate, owner of several properties scattered throughout California. Always mentioning her investments in casual conversations, Melissa was enchanted by every detail of this luxurious life that seemed straight out of a celebrity magazine. She has an incredible apartment in Santa Monica, Mom, with an ocean view, and drives a beautiful imported car. My daughter recounted as if talking about a personal hero. I tried to be happy for her happiness, but couldn't ignore the tone of comparison that was starting to emerge in those conversations. It was as if, for the first time, Melissa had found a model of what a truly successful woman would be. And that model, obviously, wasn't me, the elderly mother who worked her whole life at a Seattle hospital. The stories about Catherine became increasingly frequent and elaborate in our shallow phone conversation. Sophisticated brunches at trendy restaurants, dinners on exclusive rooftops with panoramic city view, spontaneous trips to wineries in Napa, everything documented in impeccable photos that Melissa showed me with admiration in her eyes, like a child showing off a new toy. Catherine always impeccably dressed in designer clothes, sparkling jewelry, and that confident smile of someone who never had to worry about money. She's so inspiring, Mom. Built everything herself, Melissa would say, with an emphasis that hurt me. Herself? I thought to myself. And I, who worked double to pay for your college, didn't I build everything myself too? But I swallowed those questions and just listened, feeling the abyss between us grow even more with each reference. That's when I noticed something disturbing happening right in front of me, but without being able to do anything to stop it. Melissa started creating a new ideal family in her head, a family that didn't include me the same way. Catherine became the reference, the advisor, the woman she admired and wanted to imitate in everything. She'd listen attentively to every piece of advice the mother-in-law gave, even if they were about subjects she didn't understand very well. Catherine said I should invest more in myself. Catherine thinks it's important to surround yourself with successful people. Phrases like that started permeating our conversation. And in each one, I felt I was being compared and falling into second place, losing space to that woman, the rich and glamorous mother-in-law who represented everything I could never be for my own daughter. The comparisons started subtle, but became increasingly obvious and painful over the months. Catherine always says presentation is everything in life, Melissa commented while looking at my simple clothes during a video call. Or, Catherine taught me that networking is essential to grow professionally, as if I'd never taught her anything of value. Each phrase was like a small needle prick, reminding me that I wasn't enough, that my humble life didn't have the necessary shine. Me, who spent nights awake caring for her when she was sick, who gave up my own dreams to make hers come true. But none of that seemed to matter anymore in the face of Catherine Thompson's glamour and her apparently perfect life. My daughter was being seduced by an image, by a shiny facade I couldn't compete with. What hurt me most was seeing how Melissa absorbed every word from Catherine's mouth as if it were absolute truth. Catherine says, each person is responsible for their own success. She'd repeat with conviction, without noticing the irony in that statement. After all, what was success? Having expensive bags and imported cars. Or raising a daughter alone, working until exhaustion to give her opportunities. But these questions got stuck in my throat, because I knew anything I said would sound like envy or bitterness. And maybe Melissa was right in some twisted way. Maybe I really hadn't built anything great by the standards she now valued. By the standards Catherine Thompson was planting in her head day after day, transforming my ungrateful daughter into someone I barely recognized. I started noticing that Melissa was changing not just with me, but in how she viewed the world around her. She began giving more importance to material things, status, appearances, values I'd never cultivated in her. We need to think big. Catherine always says that she'd say when I suggested caution with spending or risky investments, that woman's influence was so strong it seemed to have erased all the values I tried to pass along during years of raising her. It was as if Catherine had become the new maternal figure in Melissa's life, the improved and more glamorous version in me. I was just the biological mother, the one who fulfilled her obligation and could now be set aside. The pain of this rejection was like a constant weight on my chest, accompanying me every moment of the day. And the worst of all is that Catherine knew exactly what she was doing. Of that I was absolutely certain. She cultivated that image of mentor, of inspiring woman who was helping my daughter grow and mature. But there was something in Melissa's accounts that bothered me, a visceral feeling that things weren't quite what they seemed. No one is that perfect, that successful, that generous with advice all the time without wanting something in return. But I had no proof of anything, just that mother's intuition that knows dangers before they even manifest. So I stayed quiet, watching from afar while my daughter moved further from me and closer to that woman, not knowing that soon this closeness would bring consequences none of us were prepared to face. The relationship between Melissa and Catherine became so close that my daughter started spending holidays and special occasions with the Thompson family instead of me. Catherine organized an incredible Thanksgiving dinner. "Mom, you understand, right? It's important for Aaron that I be there," she explained, and I said I understood perfectly, even with my heart clenched. You see, I was losing my daughter to a woman I barely knew, a woman who represented everything she now wanted to be, and there was nothing I could do to change it, no words I could say to make her see what was happening. Catherine Thompson had entered our story as a main character, pushing me increasingly into the shadows, and my ungrateful daughter seemed completely blind to the manipulation she was suffering. Too enchanted by the false shine of that luxury life, if things were already difficult between Melissa and me after she dove headfirst into this new relationship with Catherine, everything got worse in a way I never imagined. The contempt started subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, like a fine crack in a wall that widens over time. Comments that were once just distant became cutting, sharp as blades that wounded me deep. And the worst part is that Melissa didn't even seem to notice how much her words hurt. Or maybe she noticed and simply didn't care anymore. She was so immersed in that world of glamour and appearances that Catherine represented that she completely lost track of how much she was hurting me. Each conversation became a minefield where I walked on eggshells, trying not to say anything that would irritate her or make her despise me even more. It was exhausting, painful, and above all, profoundly sad to see my own daughter treating me that way. The first clear manifestations of this contempt came during a visit I made to Los Angeles. A few months after her marriage to Aaron, I'd saved 4 weeks to make that trip, wanting to spend quality time with my daughter and get to know my son-in-law better. But from the moment I arrived, I felt I was invading a space where I was no longer truly welcome. Melissa barely hugged me at the door, gave that quick, protocol hug of someone greeting a distant acquaintance. "Hi, Mom? You okay?" she asked without really waiting for an answer, already turning her back to return to the living room where Aaron was watching television. I carried my suitcase alone to the guest room, a small space that looked more like a storage room than a place to receive visitors. There I was, in the house I helped furnish, feeling like an unwanted intruder. How had things reached this point so quickly? During dinner that first night, the conversation revolved entirely around Catherine and the wonders she'd been doing lately. Catherine just got back from Aspen. Mom, she went skiing and stayed at an incredible resort. Melissa recounted excitedly while serving me a tiny portion of salad. She always says it's important to invest in experiences, not just material things. I nodded politely, trying to show interest, but inside my heart clenched more and more so that, was it, all my sacrifices, all the experiences I've provided for her over the years, none of that counted as investment? I wanted to ask, wanted to question this distorted logic, but knew anything I said would be interpreted as envy or bitterness. So I continued eating in silence, swallowing not just the tasteless food, but also all my frustration and hurt that grew with each minute. It was during that same visit that I heard for the first time the phrase that would become a cruel mantra from my ungrateful daughter's mouth. We were cleaning up the kitchen after dinner when she, in a casual and devastating way, dropped, "You know, Mom, Catherine always says everyone builds their own life. There's no point expecting others to do things for you." I froze with dishes in hand, trying to process what I'd just heard and its painful implications. Everyone builds their own life. And what had I done then? Didn't I build my life while building hers too? I worked double, triple even to ensure she had opportunities I never had in my youth. But apparently, in Melissa's new life philosophy, influenced by Catherine, everything I did had no value whatsoever. I was just someone who fulfilled her obligation and nothing more than that. Someone who couldn't build anything really great or impressive. The comments became increasingly direct and cruel in the weeks and months following that disastrous visit. In sporadic phone calls, Melissa started openly questioning my life choices, as if she'd suddenly gained the right to judge me. "Why didn't you ever try opening your own business? Mom, Catherine says entrepreneurial people go much further in life, she commented once, with a tone of superiority that made me tremble with contained indignation. Or, you never thought about making investments, making your money work for you. Catherine always talks about that. Each phrase was a precise stab in my already wounded heart. As if it were easy to open a business when you can barely pay the bills at the end of the month. As if investing were an option when every penny you earn goes to ensuring your daughter has a better future. But she didn't see that. Didn't want to see, was too blinded by the false shine of Catherine's life. Family gatherings became true nightmares from which I always left emotionally destroyed and questioning my own worth. I remember a particularly painful Sunday lunch at Erin's parents' house, where Catherine was also present for the first time I met her in person. She arrived as always, impeccably dressed, with that air of superiority some rich people naturally carry. During the meal, the conversation inevitably revolved around business and financial success, topics I understood little about and had little to contribute to. Melissa, sitting next to Catherine like a disciple beside her teacher, faithfully repeated every opinion the mother-in-law expressed. It's like Catherine always says, success is a choice, not a circumstance, my daughter proclaimed loudly, and everyone around the table nodded in approval, except me, who lowered my eyes to my plate, trying to contain the tears that threatened to fall. It was at that same lunch that Catherine, looking directly at me with a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes, asked about my career. So, Evelyn, you've worked as a nurse your whole life, right? Never thought about doing something bigger, she said with a poisonous sweetness that made me choke on my food. Something bigger? As if caring for sick people, saving lives, working 12-hour shifts wasn't something small or insignificant. As if my honest work had no value because it didn't generate the kind of wealth she flaunted. Before I could answer anything, Melissa intervened with a nervous giggle. My mom's always been more traditional, you know. She likes the stability of a steady job. Traditional? That was the word she now used to describe my life of sacrifices. I felt my heart break a little more inside my chest, but kept the smile on my face, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break completely. After that day, the attacks became even more frequent and direct, without any shame or consideration for my feelings. Melissa started openly insinuating that my life had been a waste, that I could have done much more if I'd thought big like Catherine always did. You never had ambition, Mom? Never really wanted to grow? She asked me once during a call, and I simply hung up the phone without answering, crying alone in my small Seattle apartment. Ambition? My ambition was to see my daughter happy, graduated, successful, fulfilled, and I achieved that, despite all the difficulties, despite being alone on this journey since her father abandoned us. But apparently, that didn't count as ambition by the new standards she'd adopted. Only the kind of success that came with imported cars and luxury apartments counted. The kind of success Catherine supposedly built herself. The words that hurt most, however, came during a particularly intense argument we had over the phone a few months later. I'd gently suggested that maybe she should save a bit more, worried about some comments she'd made about excessive spending. The reaction was explosive and completely disproportionate to my innocent comment. You don't understand anything about money. Mom, you lived your whole life in poverty because you never had the courage to take risks, she shouted from the other end of the line, and each word was like a punch to the stomach. Catherine built an empire while you stayed in mediocrity. Don't come giving me financial advice when you never managed to build anything great. There it was, total humiliation, expressed in cruel words by my own daughter, the one I carried in my womb, held in my arms on feverish nights, encouraged in every step of life, now telling me I'd never built anything great, that my life was mediocre and insignificant. After that devastating conversation, I spent days unable to eat properly or sleep a full night. Those words echoed in my head constantly, making me question everything about my existence and my choices. Was she right? Was my life really worthless? But then I'd look at old photos, see little Melissa smiling in my arms, and I'd remember each sacrifice I made out of true love. No, I hadn't built a business empire or accumulated impressive material wealth, but I'd built something much more important. I'd given unconditional love, real opportunities, and a solid foundation for my daughter to grow. If she now chose to belittle all that because of the influence of a woman she barely knew, the problem wasn't with me. The problem was with her and the distorted values she was blindly embracing. And it was in this moment of clarity, at the bottom of my pain, that something started changing inside me. It was on a rainy October afternoon, the kind Seattle has plenty of, that my life started taking a completely different turn. I was sitting in the living room of my small apartment, drinking tea and trying not to think about the last cruel words Melissa had said to me when my phone rang. It was Teresa Brooks, my longtime friend from the days when we worked together at the hospital, before she moved to Los Angeles and pursued a career in the banking sector. Teresa's always been that friend who appears at the right moments. You know, the one who truly knows you and notices when something's wrong, even if you try to hide it. Evelyn, how are you? It's been a while since we really talked, she said with that warm voice that always comforted me. And it was just hearing that genuine tone of concern that I couldn't hold back anymore. I broke down and told her everything that was happening with Melissa. Teresa listened patiently for almost an hour, without interrupting once, just making sounds of understanding while I vented. I told her about Melissa's distance, about Catherine and her apparently perfect luxury life, about the cruel comments and growing contempt. And the worst part, Teresa, is I can't compete with this woman. She is everything I never had. Money, status, a glamorous life that dazzles anyone, I said between sobs, feeling the weight of that overwhelming situation. There was silence on the other end of the line, one of those heavy silences indicating the person is processing something important. Then Teresa said something that would completely change the course of this story. Catherine Thompson, you said. That name's familiar to me, Evelyn. Very familiar, actually. My heart instantly accelerated, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension taking over me. What did Teresa know that I didn't? Wait, you know her? I asked, sitting upright on the couch, all attention focused on that conversation that had suddenly taken an unexpected. Teresa hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully before speaking. Not personally, but I've seen her name in some reports at the bank where I work. Financial risk reports, Evelyn, she said with a serious tone that made me swallow hard. Financial risk? The real estate magnate from Santa Monica was in financial risk reports. That made no sense in my head, completely conflicted with the image Melissa painted of this woman. Are you sure it's the same person? Catherine Thompson is a relatively common name, I questioned, still not wanting to believe there could be something wrong with my daughter's perfect mother. But deep down, part of me already knew Teresa wouldn't call to mention this if she weren't sure. Teresa confirmed it was the same person after verifying some details I mentioned about Catherine. The Santa Monica address, the real estate investment company, even the car model she drove. It's her, Evelyn, and I'll tell you more. From what I saw in the reports, things aren't going well at all for this woman. My friend revealed cautiously, always conscious of banking confidentiality issues. She couldn't give me specific details right there on the phone, but the simple confirmation that there were financial problems was enough to make my mind race in 1,000 different directions. Could it be possible that all that ostentation was a facade, that the perfect life Catherine displayed on social media and at family dinners was nothing but a carefully constructed illusion? And more importantly, did Melissa have any idea she was being influenced by someone who might not be who she claimed to be? Teresa, could you investigate more about this? Within legal limits, of course, I asked, feeling for the first time in months a hint of hope mixed with something that looked very much like justice. It wasn't about revenge or proving I was better than Catherine. Nothing like that. It was about protecting my daughter from a potentially dangerous influence, from a woman who could be leading Melissa down a destructive path based on lies and false appearances. Teresa promised she'd do what she could, using only public information and records she had legitimate access to at the bank. But Evelyn, promise me one thing, she said before hanging up. Don't do anything hasty with this information when I pass it to you. We need to be strategic about how to handle this. I promised, even though inside I was boiling with anxiety and anticipation about what she'd discover in the coming days. The days that followed were the longest of my life, each hour seeming to drag on eternally while I waited for news from Teresa. I tried to maintain my normal routine, but my mind was constantly turned to Catherine Thompson and her possible secret. I started rethinking every comment Melissa had made about her mother, every story about luxurious trips and successful investments, looking for gaps and inconsistencies that could reveal the truth. And you know what's funny? The more I thought about it, the more strange little details started appearing in my memory. like how Catherine always talked about her real estate properties, but never specifically about which ones or where they were. How she mentioned expensive trips, but photos on social media were always very similar, as if they were from the same place. Small things that went unnoticed at the time, but now gained a new, potentially revealing significance. Finally, after almost 2 weeks, that felt like 2 entire years, Teresa called me back with news that would confirm my growing suspicions. "Evelyn, you need to sit down to hear what I discovered," she began, and from the tone of her voice, I knew it was something big. I prepared a cup of strong coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for what was coming. I got access to some public records, lawsuits, and financial documents about Catherine Thompson. "And Evelyn, this woman is nothing like she appears to be," Teresa said, and then began revealing a truth that would completely change my understanding of that entire situation. A truth that explained so much, that connected so many loose ends, that finally made sense in a disturbing way. Perfect. Catherine Thompson was hiding something much bigger than I could have imagined. First of all, she didn't build any empire herself like she's been saying. Teresa began explaining methodically, like the competent professional she'd always been. All the wealth she flaunts came from a massive inheritance left by her father, a very successful real estate investor in San Diego who passed away about 10 years ago. So that was it? All that talk about entrepreneurship, about building your own life, about being a self-made woman, all lies. Catherine had simply inherited a fortune, and now pretended she'd achieved everything through hard work and intelligence. The irony was so great I almost laughed, but Teresa continued. "And there's more, Evelyn, much more. Since taking over her father's business, Catherine has managed everything in a completely irresponsible and destructive way." My heart accelerated as I absorbed each word, each revelation that dismantled the perfect image my ungrateful daughter so admired. Teresa continued revealing details that left me absolutely shocked at the level of fraud Catherine maintained daily. "She's drowning in debt, Evelyn, deeply drowning. The luxury apartment in Santa Monica, rented and 3 months behind on payment. The imported car, financed to the max. And she's already received seizure warnings. The trips to Napa and Aspen, all financed on multiple maxed-out credit cards." Each revelation was like a punch, dismantling the carefully constructed facade. Teresa had done her homework completely, gathering evidence from lawsuits for unpaid debts, lien records, eviction notices, everything documented in public records anyone could access if they knew where to look. And the most absurd thing of all is that Catherine continued maintaining that image of a successful woman even while being on the verge of total bankruptcy. "Evelyn, this woman is a time bomb about to explode financially," Teresa concluded with genuine concern in her voice. "And if your daughter's following her advice, you need to act fast before the damage is irreparable." I hung up the phone a few minutes later, with my head spinning in 1,000 different directions, processing everything I'd just discovered. The woman my daughter so admired, who used as an example of success to humiliate and diminish my sacrifices, was a complete fraud. An irresponsible heiress who squandered her father's fortune and now maintained an expensive facade of success while sinking into increasingly deep debts. And worse, she was influencing my daughter with disastrous financial advice that could destroy the future I'd worked so hard to build for her. Something needed to be done, and fast. But the question was, how to expose the truth without seeming like the bitter mother trying to sabotage her daughter's happiness. After that revealing conversation with Teresa, I spent days immersed in thoughts about how to proceed with that explosive information. The truth about Catherine Thompson was so absurd, so different from the image she projected, that part of me still struggled to believe completely. But Teresa wasn't one to make up stories or exaggerate facts. She was meticulous, careful, and had shown me public documents that proved every word she said. So there I was, sitting with an enormous weight on my shoulders, knowing a truth that could completely destroy the illusion my daughter was living in. The question hammering in my head constantly was, what to do with this information, how to use it to help Melissa without seeming like I was just trying to defame the mother-in-law out of envy or resentment. It was a thin and dangerous line to walk, but I knew I couldn't simply ignore what I'd discovered. Teresa sent me by email, confidentially and carefully, copies of some public documents she'd managed to gather about Catherine, lawsuits filed by creditors, eviction notices that became public, property lien records. Even some articles from financial websites mentioning problems with the investment company she supposedly ran. The more I read, the more my indignation grew viscerally and uncontrollably. This woman had inherited a fortune estimated at over $10 million when her father passed away, an amount most people can't even imagine having in an entire lifetime. And in less than a decade, she managed to squander almost everything through terrible business decisions, extravagant spending, and a complete lack of financial sense. It was almost impressive in its incompetence, if it weren't so tragic and dangerous for those under her influence, like my ungrateful daughter. What Teresa discovered about Catherine's current life was even more shocking when contrasted with the image she so carefully cultivated. The luxury apartment in Santa Monica, which Melissa so admired and mentioned frequently, was really 3 months behind on rent. The landlord had already initiated eviction proceedings, but Catherine managed to delay through legal maneuvers in empty payment promises that never materialized. The expensive designer bags she displayed in photos, most were rented from services specialized in that. Companies that rent luxury items to people who want to maintain appearances on social media without actually having money to buy them. It was all a meticulously constructed illusion, a facade so well mounted it fooled even close people who should have known her better. And my daughter had fallen completely into that shiny trap of lies and false ostentation. The imported car Catherine drove, the one Melissa had mentioned with such dazzlement several times, was financed to the last penny of its value. And not just financed, but with several overdue installments that had already resulted in vehicle seizure warrants. Teresa discovered Catherine had even received a final notification from the bank threatening to retrieve the car at her residence if she didn't regularize the situation immediately. But even so, she continued driving that car through Santa Monica streets as if it were completely hers, posting photos of it on social media with hashtags about success and achievements. The audacity was impressive, really. How does someone manage to maintain such an elaborate fraud while literally on the verge of total financial collapse? What kind of person does that? And, more importantly, what kind of person influences other people with financial advice when their own financial life is a complete disaster? The trips Catherine boasted about, those to Napa Valley and Aspen that Melissa mentioned with admiration and a touch of envy, were all financed by credit cards at maximum. Teresa managed to confirm through public lawsuit records that Catherine had at least 4 main credit cards, all maxed out or very close to the limit, with accumulated debts easily reaching hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they weren't essential expenses or legitimate investments. They were pure luxury spending, 5-star hotels, expensive restaurants, exclusive experiences, everything to maintain that image of successful woman who travels the world without work. Each Instagram photo had a high price hidden behind it, a price she could no longer pay but continued accumulating anyway. It was pure financial madness, but presented as a successful lifestyle to impress unsuspecting people like my daughter. The real estate investment company Catherine claimed to run so competently was another house of cards about to completely collapse. Teresa discovered that of the various properties her father had left as inheritance, valuable properties in San Diego and other California cities, Catherine had already sold more than half to cover growing debts and maintain her unsustainable lifestyle. The remaining properties were mortgaged to the ceiling, some with foreclosure proceedings already underway because she couldn't keep up with payments. The successful businesswoman was actually presiding over the gradual dismantling of an empire her father took decades to build through hard work and intelligent decisions. And the most ironic part of all, Catherine had the audacity to talk about building your own success while systematically destroying the legacy that simply fell into her lap without any effort on her part. But what made me absolutely furious, more than anything else I discovered, was knowing Catherine was giving financial advice to Melissa and Aaron, advice about investment, about how to make money work for you, about thinking big and taking calculated risks. A woman who was drowning in debt up to her neck, who couldn't pay her own rent, who had maxed out credit cards and accumulating lawsuits, was positioning herself as a financial mentor to my daughter. And Melissa, blinded by the facade's shine, absorbed every word as if they were pearls of wisdom from a true expert. It made me want to scream, to shake my daughter and make her see the screaming reality right in front of her nose. But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. that years of influence and manipulation wouldn't undo with a simple warning shout from the mother she already despised. Teresa warned me that Catherine's situation was so serious it would probably result in declared bankruptcy within a few months, maybe a year at most. The debts are piling up faster than she can manage. Evelyn, it's mathematically impossible for her to get out of this hole without declaring bankruptcy or finding a massive source of money somewhere. My friend explained with the experience of someone who's worked with finances for decades. And then something horrible crossed my mind like an icy lightning bolt. Could Catherine be trying to get money through Aaron and Melissa? Could all that closeness, all that affectionate mentorship, have a hidden financial objective behind it? The idea made me nauseous, but unfortunately made total sinister sense. A woman desperate for money, surrounding herself with younger and impressionable people, gaining their trust to eventually ask for loans or involve them in risky schemes. It was a classic pattern Teresa had seen other times at the bank where she worked. I started methodically gathering all the documents Teresa sent me, organizing them in physical and digital folders to have everything at hand when I need. I had lawsuits clearly showing Catherine's debts, had eviction notices with dates and amounts, had property lien records, had everything documented. The truth was there, in black and white, awaiting the right moment to be revealed to who needed to see it. But I knew I needed to be strategic. That simply throwing this information in Melissa's face wouldn't work and would probably only push her further from me. She'd accuse me of making things up out of envy, of trying to sabotage her relationship with her mother-in-law out of pure malice. No, I needed a better plan. A way to expose the truth that would be undeniable and would finally make Melissa open her eyes to the reality of the situation she was getting deeper and deeper into. While organizing the documents and carefully planning my next steps, I couldn't help feeling a strange mixture of conflicting emotions. Anger at Catherine for being a manipulative fraud who was influencing my daughter with lies and false appearances. Sadness for Melissa, who was being deceived and making life decisions based on advice from someone completely financially. And, I confess, a dark hint of satisfaction for finally having concrete proof that I wasn't the failure my ungrateful daughter thought I was. After all, I'd worked honestly my whole life, never pretended to be something I wasn't, never lied about my modest but real achievement. Catherine, on the other hand, was an impostor living an elaborate lie that was about to spectacularly crumble, and when that happened, I'd have to be there to pick up the pieces and help my daughter rebuild, if she'd let me. Armed with the truth about Catherine, I started paying much more attention to every detail Melissa shared about her mother-in-law in our increasingly rare conversations. And you know what's fascinating in a disturbing way? When you know the backstage, when you know the truth behind the facade, suddenly everything starts making sense in a completely different way. Every story my daughter told about Catherine now sounded like a piece of a giant puzzle, finally fitting together, revealing the complete picture. The signs were always there, screaming and obvious, but no one paid attention because everyone was hypnotized by the superficial shine. It was like watching a movie for the second time and noticing all the clues you missed the first time. Except this wasn't fiction. It was real life affecting real people. And one of those people was my daughter, increasingly entangled in a web of carefully woven lies. Catherine was a master at maintaining that image of successful and powerful woman. Had to admit that even hating to recognize any merit in her, she knew exactly what to do, what to say, how to present herself so people would completely believe in the character she created. At family gatherings, Melissa described with admiration, Catherine always arrived impeccably dressed in clothes that looked very expensive, driving that imported car about to be seized, carrying bags that were actually rented. She spoke with that unshakable confidence of someone who never had to worry about money, using business and investment jargon that impressed people who didn't understand much about the subject. And it worked perfectly. People ate out of her hand, including my Aaron and especially my ungrateful daughter, who absorbed every word as if they were sacred commandments of success. It was pure theater, an Oscar-worthy performance, but totally based on unsustainable lies. One of Catherine's favorite tactics, which I noticed analyzing the stories I heard, was constantly talking about investments she supposedly was making or considering making. Catherine's analyzing a new real estate venture in San Diego, Melissa would tell me excitedly during one of our calls. Or, she's thinking about expanding to the Miami market, says it's the next big real estate hub. Each phrase was vague enough to sound impressive, but specific enough to seem legitimate and well thought out. But now I knew the truth. Catherine wasn't investing in anything because she had no money to invest in absolutely anything. She was desperately selling the properties still remaining from her father's inheritance to try covering the mountains of debts piling up. But maintaining that talk about future investments helped sustain the illusion of prosperity, made people think, wow, she's always growing, always expanding, when in reality, she was sinking faster and faster into a bottomless financial hole. The expansive dinners Catherine occasionally promoted were also part of this elaborate performance of success and abundance. Melissa would return from these events dazzled, describing in detail the sophisticated restaurants, exclusive rooftops with spectacular city views, expensive wines served. Catherine's so generous, Mom. She always insists on paying everyone's bill. My daughter would comment admiringly, and I'd just bite my tongue not to respond what I really thought. Generous. She was sinking even deeper into credit card debt to maintain that appearance of wealth and generosity. Each expensive dinner was a few more $1,000s added to the pile of debts she'd never be able to pay. But to those watching from outside, it looked exactly like she wanted. A successful woman who could afford to treat family and friends to expensive experiences without batting an eye. The reality was grotesquely different from the projected image, and Catherine didn't miss any opportunity to belittle other people, especially me, to further elevate her own image built on lies. Melissa would repeat phrases the mother-in-law frequently dropped, always with that tone of veiled superiority. If people really worked hard and intelligently, they'd build more in life, or it's all about mindset. Some people simply don't have the vision necessary for success. Each phrase was an indirectly aimed barb at me. The elderly mother who supposedly never managed to build anything really impressive or worthy of admiration. Catherine loved making these subtle comparisons, positioning herself as the supreme example of success while diminishing people who worked honestly and lived within their real means. The irony was so heavy, it was almost comical. A woman drowning in debt up to her neck, giving lessons about financial success and criticizing those who actually managed to keep their bills paid. But the most painful comment that reached me through Melissa was said during a brunch Catherine organized for entrepreneurial women from her social circle. My daughter participated and was absolutely enchanted with everything, calling me right after to share every detail of that event. It was amazing, Mom. Catherine talked about wealth building and legacy. And you know what she said? That if a person had really worked hard during their life, they would have built much more than just a small apartment and a modest retirement. I froze when I heard that, my hands trembling with total rage and humiliation. She was talking about me. Catherine was using my life as a negative example, as a warning of what not to do if you want real success. And my own daughter was there, nodding her head, absorbing that poisonous message without realizing she was being manipulated, against the very mother who raised her alone with so much sacrifice. Melissa, completely seduced by that false success narrative, started distancing herself even more from me. Each conversation we had was permeated by this new knowledge she acquired with Catherine daily. You never thought about creating multiple income streams, Mom? She'd ask with that tone, mixing genuine curiosity with an irritating touch of superiority. Catherine always says truly intelligent people make money work for them, not work for money. I'd breathe deeply and count to 10 mentally before responding, trying not to explode and say everything I really thought. How could I make money work for me when every penny I earned went to put food on the table and pay for your college? Melissa, how would I create multiple income streams working 12 hours a day at a hospital saving lives? But these questions stayed stuck in my throat because I knew arguing against Catherine's powerful influence would be pointless. What frustrated me most was seeing how Catherine managed to be so convincing, even being completely wrong in everything related to finances. She'd talk about leverage and accelerated growth opportunity, sophisticated terms that impressed those listening, but in practice only meant taking on increasingly larger debts to maintain appearances. And my ungrateful daughter bought that speech completely, starting to make questionable financial decisions based on her mother-in-law's advice. Catherine said Aaron and I should invest in a bigger property. That's how real wealth is built, Melissa told me once, and my heart sank in my chest. Investing in a bigger property meant taking on a huge mortgage, probably more than they could really afford comfortably. But Catherine had made it seem like the intelligent decision, the logical next step for ambitious people like them. It was terrifying to see my daughter walking directly into a financial trap with eyes wide open but completely blinded by the illusion. Catherine also loved posting on social media, and Melissa constantly showed me these posts as if they were irrefutable proof of legitimate success. Photos at expensive restaurants with captions about celebrating achievement. Selfies in front of luxury buildings with comments about next investments. Travel images with inspirational messages about living the life deserve. Each post was carefully calculated to project abundance and success, and it worked perfectly with people who didn't know the backstage. But I now knew the truth. Each of those photos represented more debt, more credit card installments, more lies being piled on top of previous lies. It was a house of cards about to collapse. But Catherine kept adding more cards on top as if she could keep it standing forever through pure determination and impressive audacity. And the worst part is that while that house didn't fall, she'd continue influencing my daughter with that unsustainable and destructive lifestyle. Watching all this from afar, now armed with knowledge of the real, I constantly wondered when and how the castle of lies would finally crumble. Because one thing was certain. You can't maintain a fraud like that forever, no matter how skilled the person is at deceiving others. Eventually, creditors collect, lawsuits advance, evictions happen, and truth comes out inevitably and usually devastating. My biggest concern was that when that happened, my daughter would be so financially and emotionally entangled with Catherine that she'd be dragged along in that catastrophic fall. I needed to act before it was too late, but needed to do it in a way that Melissa would really see the truth. Instead of simply hating me more for attacking the wonderful mother, the moment to reveal everything was rapidly approaching. I could feel it in my bones. And when it came, I'd need to be completely prepared to show not just who Catherine really was, but also to finally prove that I was never the failure my ungrateful daughter had been led to believe I was. It was months of almost total silence after that last tense conversation we had about investments and risky financial decisions. Melissa barely called me, and when she did, conversations were superficial and ice-cold, full of uncomfortable pauses and subjects that led nowhere. I'd already resigned myself to that distance, trying to focus on my own life and waiting for the right moment to use the information I had about Catherine strategically and effectively. But then, on a rainy March morning, my phone rang and her name appeared on the screen, making my heart race. I answered somewhat hesitantly, not knowing what to expect from this unexpected call. "Mom." Her voice sounded different, broken, without that arrogant confidence she'd acquired lately. "Can I visit you? I need to talk to you personally about something important." My mother's instinct immediately went on maximum alert, because I knew that tone of voice. It was the tone from when something was very, very wrong. 2 days later, Melissa was at my small Seattle apartment door, and the transformation in her appearance shocked me deeply. Her eyes were swollen and red from so much crying, skin pale and tired. Hair she always kept impeccable was disheveled and lifeless. She entered without saying much, leaving a small suitcase on the living room floor, and simply threw herself on the couch as if the entire weight of the world was on her fragile shoulder. I made tea in silence, respecting that moment of hers, waiting for her to find the words to explain what had happened. I sat beside her in the same position I'd sit when she was a child and had problems at school, offering that maternal comfort that never stops existing regardless of how many hurts exist between mother and daughter. "Mom, Aaron and I are in big trouble," she finally began, and tears rolled down her face uncontrollably, each one carrying the weight of bad decisions and inevitable consequences. The story she told over the next 2 hours was exactly what I'd feared would happen since I discovered the truth about Catherine months ago. Following the mother-in-law's financial advice, Melissa and Aaron had made a series of completely irresponsible and destructive decisions. They bought an apartment way above what they could comfortably afford, taking on a suffocating mortgage that consumed almost their entire salary. They invested in opportunities Catherine recommended, which were actually risky and poorly planned schemes that resulted in significant losses. They took out loans to leverage investment, another sophisticated phrase Catherine loved using, but in practice only meant sinking into increasingly deep debts. And now, a few months after all these terrible decisions, they were completely financially stuck without seeing a possible way out. Bills were piling up, creditors constantly called, and the pressure was destroying their marriage day after day without mercy. Catherine said everything would work out, that this was how rich people really built wealth. Melissa sobbed while recounting, and I could see in her eyes the slow and painful realization that she'd been deceived. She spoke with so much confidence. Mom said she knew people who did exactly this and became millionaires. How was I supposed to know it was all wrong? I breathed deeply. So allons dit, I told you so, words that wanted to come out of my mouth. Because this wasn't the moment for that. It wasn't time to rub her mistakes in her face. She was already suffering enough, already paying the high price of blindly trusting someone who didn't deserve that trust. But part of me, that wounded part that had been humiliated and despised for so long, felt a hint of bitter satisfaction, seeing I was right all along, about Catherine being a complete and dangerous fraud to everyone around. And Catherine, can't she help you guys get out of this situation she herself helped create? I asked, already knowing what the answer would be, but needing to hear it from Melissa's own mouth. My daughter gave a bitter laugh without humor that sounded more like a choke sob. That's why I came to see you, Mom. When we told Catherine about the financial problems, we expected her to help us, to lend us money, or at least guide us on what to do to get out of this hole. She paused, wiping tears with the back of her hand almost childishly. You know how much she managed to lend us? $500. Just $500 measly dollars. Mom, and she still had the audacity to say she needed us to return it with interest within 3 months because she had important investments scheduled. The irony was so absurd it would be funny if it weren't tragic. The woman who talked so much about wealth and investments couldn't even lend a decent amount to her own son in difficulties. It was at that moment Melissa finally started questioning everything she'd believed about Catherine in recent years. It doesn't make sense, Mom. If she's so rich and successful, as she always demonstrated, why couldn't she lend us more? Why was $500 the maximum she offered? She thought out loud, and I could see the gears turning in her head, connecting dots that were always there, but she refused to see before. But I still said nothing about what I knew about the documents Teresa had obtained, about the complete truth of Catherine's catastrophic financial situation. It wasn't the moment yet. My ungrateful daughter needed to arrive at some conclusions on her own first, so that when I revealed everything, she'd be truly ready to absorb and believe in the complete extent of the fraud. So I just listened, offered tea, and let her process all that in her own time and pace. So you came here to ask me for money? I finally asked the question, hanging in the air since she arrived. Melissa lowered her eyes, ashamed, tears returning with full force. I know I have no right to ask for anything after how I treated you in recent years. Mom, I know I was a horrible daughter, that I despised you, that I diminished everything you did for me throughout life. She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. But I don't have anyone else to turn to. We're desperate, at risk of losing the apartment, having our credit destroyed, seeing everything crumble. Could you lend us a few thousand? I promise to return it as soon as we can stabilize again. And there it was, the moment I knew would eventually arrive. My daughter, who'd treated me like trash for years, who'd humiliated me saying I never built anything great, was now begging for help from the mother she always despised. I looked at her for a long moment, this human being I'd carried in my womb for 9 months, who I'd raised alone with all the love and sacrifice I could muster. And you know what I felt in that crucial moment? A strange mixture of unconditional maternal love, deep anger for years of contempt, and something new, the courage to finally establish boundaries I should have established long ago. Melissa, I began with a calm but firm voice. You're right about one thing. You were a horrible daughter in recent years. You treated me like I was worthless, as if all my sacrifices were just unimportant obligations. She started opening her mouth to defend herself or apologize, but I raised my hand asking for silence. But what hurts me most isn't even that. It's that you allowed a stranger, a woman you barely knew, to completely change your perception about who I am and about everything we did together. You chose to believe in her shiny facade instead of the solid and honest truth I always had with you. I stood up from the couch, walking to the window where Seattle's rain fell persistently over the gray city. I'm not going to lend you the money, Melissa, I said with my back to her, hearing the sob that escaped her lips. Not because I don't have it, because thank God I managed to save some money over the years, living modestly and responsibly. And not because I don't love you, because I'll always love you, no matter how much you hurt me. I turned to face her, seeing desperation in her eyes. But I'm not going to put out the fires you create following advice from irresponsible people anymore. I'm not going to allow you to use me as a safety net while continuing to despise and belittle everything I am. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with years of unresolved hurts and truths finally spoken out loud. But something inside me knew this was necessary. That sometimes loving someone means letting them face the consequences of their own choices. Melissa stayed 2 more days in my apartment, and we talked a lot about everything that had happened in recent years. She started opening up in ways she hadn't in a long time, sharing doubts and fears she had about Catherine, small inconsistencies she'd noticed but ignored for being so enchanted with that luxury life. She always had excuses when we asked about visiting her properties or getting to know the businesses up close, Melissa commented thoughtfully. And we never met any of the rich and powerful friends she always mentioned having. I just listened, waiting for the perfect moment to finally reveal what I knew. Because now my daughter was starting to wake from that trance, starting to question the reality she'd blindly accepted. And when she was completely ready, when she was open to hearing the complete and shocking truth, I'd have much, much more to tell about dear Catherine Thompson and her life built on lies that were about to spectacularly crumble for everyone to see. After Melissa returned to Los Angeles, we started talking much more frequently than we had in years, and something in our relationship began slowly rebuilding. She was different, more humble, more willing to listen instead of just judging and criticizing like before, but I knew there was still a huge elephant in the room that needed to be addressed. Catherine Thompson and all the destructive influence she exerted over my daughter and son. It wasn't enough that Melissa was starting to question some things. She needed to see the complete truth with her own eyes undeniably. And it wasn't just for me to prove I was right all along, but mainly for her, to completely free her from that manipulation before it caused even greater and irreparable damage. That's when I started architecting a plan, something that would expose Catherine once and for all, leaving no room for doubts or denials, something that would reveal who really was the fraud in this emotional story, and it wasn't me. I called Teresa again, telling her about Melissa's visit and my decision to finally expose Catherine publicly. I need to do this the right way, Teresa. It needs to be irrefutable, not seem like just a bitter mother trying to destroy her daughter's mother-in-law out of envy or resentment, I explained while taking notes in an old notebook I had at home. Teresa stayed silent for a few seconds, thinking carefully about the complex and delicate situation. How exactly are you thinking of doing this? Simply showing the documents to Melissa and Aaron privately? She asked, and I could sense she knew I had something bigger in mind. No, I responded with a determination that surprised even myself. I want to do a dinner, invite the entire Thompson family. I want Catherine there, everyone there, and I want to show the truth to everyone at the same time. She spent years building this false image, manipulating people, damaging my relationship with my daughter. It's time to completely unmask this fraud. Teresa helped me organize all the documents professionally and separating by categories, lawsuits, eviction notices, lien records, credit card debts, everything organized chronologically to tell a clear and devastating story. Evelyn, are you sure about this? This is going to be ... intense. It'll change everything, probably destroy relationships within that family. She warned me with genuine concern in her voice. But I'd already made my decision and was at peace with it. Catherine already destroyed relationships. Teresa, she destroyed my relationship with my daughter, is destroying Melissa and Aaron's financial future with horrible advice, and has probably done this to other people too. I breathed deeply before continuing. I'm not going to let her continue this fraud just because revealing the truth will be uncomfortable. Sometimes discomfort is necessary for real healing to happen. And so we began preparing everything meticulously for what would be the most memorable and impactful dinner of my life. Parallel to the documents about Catherine, I decided to also prepare a presentation about everything I'd invested in Melissa's life over the years. Not to brag or make my daughter feel guilty, but to concretely show what building something great really meant, honestly. I gathered proof of university tuition I paid over for complete years, receipts from the used car purchase I gave her, bank transfers to help with rent when she was starting in Los Angeles, documents from the loan I took to help with the wedding. Each paper told a story of sacrifice, hard work, maternal love that never asked for anything in return. While organizing all this, tears silently rolled down my face, because it was painful to see quantified in numbers and documents all that love that had been so easily discarded and belittled. But it was also liberating in some way, because it proved I wasn't the failure Catherine, and even my own ungrateful daughter, had painted. The next step was organizing the dinner itself. And for that, I needed a neutral place in Los Angeles where everyone would feel comfortable attending. I researched and found a traditional and discreet restaurant, nothing too fancy or ostentatious, but with private rooms that could be rented for small events. I called and reserved a room for a family dinner on a Friday night, paying in advance with my savings I'd so carefully saved over the years. It would be a high investment for my budget, but worth every penny if it meant finally revealing the truth and protecting my daughter from further damage. I also hired a simple projector to be able to show the documents clearly for everyone to see, because I didn't want to just pass papers hand to hand. I wanted everyone to see simultaneously the complete extent of Catherine's fraud. Every detail was being planned with surgical precision, because I'd only have one chance to do this, and it needed to be perfect and irrefutable. Convincing Melissa to organize the dinner and bring all the Thompsons was the most delicate part of the entire plan. I called her a few days after we'd confirmed the restaurant reservation. "Melissa, I've been thinking a lot about everything we talked about during your visit here." I began carefully, choosing each word with attention. "I'd like to properly make peace with you and Aaron, and also get to know his family better, since we never had a real opportunity to live together." She was surprised by the invitation. I could tell by the hesitation in her voice. "You want to organize a dinner with the Thompsons, Mom? Including Catherine?" she asked, with obvious distrust, probably thinking I had some hidden intention, which was absolutely correct. "Yes, including Catherine. Look, I know we've had our differences, but she's important to you and Aaron. I want to try building a bridge, make a real effort to understand what you see in her. I lead you gently, feeling only a small pang of guilt for not being completely honest." Melissa was so touched by my supposed reconciliation gesture that she agreed to help organize everything immediately, without questioning much. "Mom, this means so much to me. Honestly, I was afraid we'd never be able to fix our relationship," she said with an emotion-choked voice. We set the date. She'd confirm with all the Thompsons, and I feigned an excitement I didn't feel, because actually my stomach was churning with anticipatory nervousness. Part of me questioned if I was doing the right thing, if there wasn't a less dramatic way to reveal the truth. But then I remembered all the years of humiliation, all the times Catherine had belittled me through my own daughter, all the disastrous financial decisions that had been made under her influence. No, there was no other way. Catherine needed to be publicly exposed in front of everyone she'd deceived, so truth would finally prevail over the carefully constructed lie. The days leading up to the dinner were the most anxious and stressful I'd lived in a long time, each minute seeming to drag eternally. I reviewed the documents hundreds of times, organized and reorganized the presentation, practiced what I'd say in front of my small bathroom. Teresa called daily to check how I was and offer moral support, because she knew the enormous weight of what I was about to do. "You're brave, Evelyn. Many people would simply swallow all this and let it go," she told me the night before the dinner. "It's not courage, Teresa. It's a mother's desperation who can't stand seeing her daughter being manipulated and destroyed by a professional liar anymore." I responded honestly. I'd packed my suitcase, set aside the clothes I'd wear, nothing too formal, but dignified and appropriate for the occasion, and caught the flight to Los Angeles with a mixture of fear and determination burning in my chest. It was time to finally turn the tables and show who really built something of value in this real story. I arrived in Los Angeles on Thursday afternoon, one day before the dinner, and stayed at a modest hotel near the restaurant where everything would happen. Melissa offered for me to stay at their house, but I politely declined, saying I didn't want to bother, when in reality I needed space and privacy to make final preparation. That night, alone in the hotel room, lying in bed looking at the ceiling with city lights coming through the window, I allowed myself to feel all the emotions I'd repressed during weeks of planning. Fear that everything would go wrong, that it would seem like just petty revenge instead of the necessary revelation it was. Accumulated anger from years being treated as inferior by my own daughter under Catherine's influence. Deep sadness for having reached this point, where a public confrontation seemed the only possible solution. And underneath all that, a fragile but persistent hope that maybe, just maybe, this would finally free Melissa from that manipulation and allow us to rebuild something real and honest between us. On Friday morning, I woke early and went to the restaurant to make final preparations and ensure everything was perfect. I tested the projector twice to make sure it would work when needed, organized the physical documents in individual folders for each person present to see up close if they wanted. The restaurant manager was extremely helpful, adjusting the room's lighting to be adequate for the presentation and ensuring we'd have total privacy during the event. Going to be a special night? He asked friendly while we adjusted chairs around the table. Oh, it'll definitely be a night no one will forget anytime soon, I responded with a crooked smile, thinking about the bomb about to explode over Catherine Thompson's perfect life. In a few hours, that entire facade carefully constructed over years would completely crumble. And finally, truth would be known by everyone who needed to know it. It was time for Catherine to face the consequences of her lies, and I'd be the instrument of this long overdue justice. At 7 o'clock sharp, I started hearing voices in the restaurant hallway, approaching the private room I'd reserved. My heart raced violently in my chest, and for a second I considered fleeing through the emergency exit and forgetting this entire absurd plan. But then I breathed deeply, smoothing the simple but elegant dress I'd chosen, and mentally prepared myself for what was about to happen. Melissa entered first with Aaron, both smiling and apparently happy for that moment of family reconciliation they thought was happening. Right behind came Aaron's parents, a nicely middle-aged couple who'd always been polite to me the few times we met. And finally, Catherine Thompson, in all her fabricated glory, wearing a designer dress, probably installment paid on 8 different cards, carrying an expensive bag I now knew was rented, with that confident smile of someone who thinks they've deceived everyone perfectly. Seeing me, she approached with false cordiality. Evelyn, what a wonderful surprise you organizing this. The first 30 minutes went relatively normally, and even pleasantly, with light conversations about weather, work, and small pleasantries, typical of family dinners. I asked the restaurant to serve appetizers and drinks first, wanting everyone comfortable and relaxed before the bomb about to explode over that table. Catherine, as always, dominated the conversation with stories about her supposed investments and luxurious trips she planned to take soon. I'm eyeing an incredible property in Malibu, might be my next acquisition, she commented casually while cutting salmon on. And I watched Melissa absorbing every word with that admiration that hadn't completely disappeared yet. I waited patiently, savoring my cheap white wine, knowing that in a few minutes, that woman would lose all the credibility veneer she maintained so carefully. It was almost time to reveal who really built something of value and who was just smoke and mirrors. When we finished the appetizers and before the main course arrived, I stood from my chair making everyone look at me with evident curiosity. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I know it must have seemed strange me organizing this suddenly, I began, and Melissa looked at me with that hopeful smile of someone thinking a beautiful speech about family and reconciliation was coming. The truth is, I asked us to gather because there are some very important things that need to be said, truths that need to finally come to light after being hidden too long. Catherine's smile faltered slightly, her eyes narrowing with sudden distrust. In recent years, I've been repeatedly humiliated and belittled. My sacrifices were diminished and ridiculed, and I was made an example of what not to do in life. And all this happened through the influence of someone who projected an image of success that simply doesn't exist in reality. The silence in the room became heavy, dense, suffocating. Everyone knew where this was going. "Mom, what are you doing?" Melissa asked with a thin, nervous voice, looking between me and Catherine with growing apprehension. I ignored the question and continued walking to the projector I'd carefully prepared. Before revealing what I discovered about certain people at this table, I want to show something about myself, about what really means building something great, not with ostentation and appearances, but with honest work and real sacrifice. I turned on the projector and the first image appeared on the white wall. Payment proof from the University of Washington with Melissa's name highlighted. 4 years of university tuition, paid in full by me, while working double shifts as a nurse in Seattle. $52,000 over 4 years. Melissa paled, her eyes fixed on the projected documents. I advanced to the next image, receipts from the used car purchase, bank transfers for rent, proof of the wedding loan, another $35,000 in direct help over the following year. All documented, all real, all done with unconditional love. Catherine was visibly uncomfortable now, nervously fiddling with her wine glass, sensing something much worse was coming in her direction. And she was absolutely right. "This is all very touching, Evelyn," But I don't understand the purpose of, she began with that condescending tone she used with me. But I interrupted her firmly. The purpose, Catherine, is to show the contrast between real construction and false facade, between substance and illusion, between honest work and elaborate lies. I switched to the next set of slides and saw the exact moment when blood completely drained from Catherine's face. On the wall appeared the first lawsuit against her, an unpaid credit card debt in the amount of $43,000. This is just the first of many lawsuits for unpaid debts that Catherine Thompson has accumulated in recent years, I explained calmly while everyone at the table sat open-mouthed. Let me show you the others. Click, click, click. More lawsuits, more debts, more irrefutable evidence of a completely destroyed financial life. Where did you get this? You have no right to investigate my private life. Catherine exploded, standing from her chair with her face red from growing rage and humiliation. They're public records, Catherine. Anyone can access them if they know where to look, I responded with unsettling calmness, almost enjoying that long-awaited moment of justice. I advanced to the next slides. Eviction notices from the Santa Monica apartment, 3 months of overdue rent, total pending value of $28,000. The luxury apartment you brag so much about, rented in with payment delays. More clicks. Documents from the imported car finance. Possible seizure warning. The car, financed to the limit with overdue installment. And then the final blow. Statements showing 4 credit cards at maximum limit. Debts totaling over $200,000. The luxury life, all built on debts you can never pay. The room was in absolute silence, except for Catherine's muffled sobs, who finally understood her fraud had come to a spectacular and devastating end. Melissa was in total shock, wide eyes going from the documents to Catherine and back to the documents, as if unable to process the reality being so brutally revealed. This can't be true. Catherine, say, this isn't true, my daughter begged, but Catherine just sank into her chair, face hidden in her hand, defeated and completely exposed. Aaron seemed equally stunned, finally connecting the dots about all the disastrous financial advice he'd followed. Everything you told us about investments, about building wealth, about taking calculated risks. You didn't know what you were talking about. You led us into a financial hole while drowning in your own, he asked with a mixture of rage and incredulity in his voice. I continued, relentlessly, showing more documents, records of properties inherited from Catherine's father that were sold to cover debts, the real estate empire she claimed to command reduced to almost nothing in less than a decade of mismanagement. And there's more, I continued, knowing I needed to complete the revelation so no doubts remained. Catherine didn't build absolutely anything herself, as she always claimed. Everything she had came from an inheritance of over $10 million left by her father, a true successful businessman who built a legitimate real estate empire through decades of hard work. I showed documents from the estate inventory proving the massive inheritance, and in less than 10 years under her irresponsible administration, she managed to destroy almost everything. Properties were sold or mortgaged, money was wasted on extravagant spending to maintain appearances, and now almost nothing remains except mountains of debt. Aaron's parents were visibly shocked, probably rethinking everything they thought they knew about Catherine. My ungrateful daughter was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as the reality of the manipulation she suffered for years finally became undeniably clear. Catherine remained silent, destroyed, with no way to deny the overwhelming evidence presented so meticulously and cruelly. For years, this woman used my daughter as an audience for her elaborate lies. I continued, my voice becoming more emotional now that the worst had already been revealed. She planted ideas in Melissa's head that I was a failure, that my life of honest work was worthless, that I never built anything great, and while doing this, while humiliating me through my own daughter, she hid the fact that her entire life was an unsustainable illusion. I looked directly at Catherine, who finally lifted her face to meet mine, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine shame. You destroyed my relationship with my daughter for years. Catherine made her despise me, belittle me, doubt my worth as a person and as a mother. And all this for what? To feel superior, to maintain your facade of success using other people as contrast. The tension in the room was almost palpable, electric. Everyone holding their breath, waiting for what would come next in that devastating confrontation. Catherine finally found her voice, broken and small, so different from the confident and arrogant tone she always used. I'm sorry. You don't understand the pressure of maintaining that image, the expectations everyone had of me after I inherited my father's business. I couldn't admit I was failing, that I wasn't as good as he was. She paused, wiping the tears that started falling, so I kept pretending, kept spending to maintain appearances, kept giving advice as if I knew what I was doing, when in reality I was completely lost. It was the first time I saw Catherine without the mask, vulnerable and human, and for a brief moment I felt something like pity. But then I remembered all the years of pain, total humiliation, seeing my daughter drift away because of this woman's lies, and the pity evaporated. Your apology doesn't erase the damage you caused, Catherine, but at least now everyone knows the truth. Finally, truth prevailed over the lie. I turned to Melissa, who looked at me with a complex mixture of guilt, shame, and something that looked very much like admiration. The silence that followed Catherine's broken confession was dense, heavy as lead, filling every corner of that restaurant's private room. No one knew exactly what to say or do, facing that devastating revelation that had just exploded like a bomb in the middle of dinner. Catherine remained seated, hunched in her chair, completely different from the confident and arrogant woman who'd entered there just an hour ago. The mask had fallen so spectacularly, it was almost hard to believe that destroyed person was the same one who'd spent years projecting success and superiority over everyone around. Aaron's parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly processing the fact that the woman they thought they knew was actually a complete stranger full of dark secrets. Aaron was pale, hands trembling slightly as he held his wine glass, probably mentally calculating how much money they'd lost following his mother's disastrous financial advice. And Melissa, my daughter, was destroyed, tears silently streaming down her face as she looked at me with an expression mixing horror, regret, and something that looked very much like belated recognition. It was Melissa who finally broke the suffocating silence dominating the room, her voice coming out trembling and loaded with emotion. Mom, I don't even know where to start apologizing for what I did to you during all these years, she began, words coming out choppy between sobs she couldn't control. You're showing me you invested almost $100,000 in me throughout my life, money you didn't have in abundance, that came from real sacrifices, extra shifts, giving up things for yourself, and I threw all that in your face, as if it meant nothing, as if it were just your obligation to do all that. She paused to breathe, wiping tears that wouldn't stop falling. Even worse, I let someone I barely knew completely change how I saw you, how I valued everything you always did for me. I was an ungrateful daughter, terrible, and I don't know if you can ever forgive me for this. Her apology was raw, sincere, coming from a place of genuine pain and deep regret. I looked at my daughter, this human being I raised with so much love and care, who got lost for a while but now seemed to finally be finding her way back. Part of me wanted to hug her immediately, say everything was forgiven, and forget the years of hurt and contempt. But another part, the wounded part still carrying the scars of each humiliation, knew that true forgiveness needed to be built with time and actions, not just with beautiful words spoken in an emotional moment. Melissa, I love you. I've always loved and always will love you. That never changed, not even in the most painful moment. I began calmly, choosing words carefully. But love doesn't mean accepting being treated like trash. Love doesn't mean allowing you to use me as a safety net while publicly despising me. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, and I really want that, it needs to be based on mutual respect and truth, not convenience or desperation. She nodded vigorously, agreeing with every word, willing to do whatever necessary to fix what she'd broken so completely. Catherine, who until then had remained silent after her confession, abruptly stood from her chair, making everyone look at her. I'm not going to stay here being publicly humiliated this way. You got what you wanted, Evelyn! Congratulations on destroying my reputation in front of my family, she said with what remained of dignity, trying to recover some control of the disparate situation. But her voice trembled on the last word, betraying the facade of strength she tried maintaining until the end. She grabbed her expensive rented bag and walked toward the door with quick steps, desperate to escape that room where all her lies had been so brutally and definitively exposed. Catherine, wait, Aaron started to say, half rising from his chair, but she interrupted him with a brusque hand gesture. No, Aaron, don't try defending me now. Everything she said is true. Every damn word. I ruined everything, lost everything, and still had the audacity to drag you with me. And with those last words, Catherine Thompson left that room, probably for the last time, taking with her the wreckage of a life built on lies that finally completely crumbled. Catherine's dramatic exit left a strange vacuum in the room, as if the air had left with her. Aaron's parents seemed not to know how to react, caught between family loyalty and the shock of devastating revelations about someone they thought they knew so well. Aaron's father finally spoke, addressing me with an expression of genuine regret on his tired face. Evelyn, we had no idea of the extent of Catherine's problems. She was always good at maintaining appearances, since she was a child. But this, he vaguely gestured toward the projector still showing the condemning documents. This is beyond anything we could imagine. His wife nodded beside him, clearly shaken. And we deeply regret you were treated so horribly because of her influence over Melissa. You didn't deserve any of that after everything you did as a mother. It was an apology on behalf of the family. And although it didn't erase the pain of recent years, it was a beginning of recognition that meant something important. Aaron was particularly destroyed, and I could understand perfectly why he'd grown up believing his mother was this successful and powerful businesswoman, when in reality she was a fraud maintaining appearances through growing debts. How did I not see the signs? He murmured more to himself than to any specific person in the room. All those times she talked about investments but never showed anything concrete. The constant excuses when we suggested visiting her properties. The way she always changed subjects when we asked details about the business. He looked at Melissa and then at me, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. And I encouraged Melissa to follow her advice, to value that lifestyle, to see you as less important because you didn't have all that ostentation. I feel so stupid, so completely deceived by my own mother. The pain in his voice was palpable. The pain of discovering a central figure in your life was very different from what you always believed. We all sat together for over 2 more hours after Catherine left, talking more honestly and openly than we'd ever talked before. Melissa asked me questions about my life, about the sacrifices I made, truly interested and engaged in a way she hadn't shown in years. She wanted to know about night shifts, about how I managed exhaustion and still found energy to be present in her life, about the difficult choices I had to make between my needs and hers. You always chose me, didn't you? She asked at one point, the realization of this truth finally penetrating completely. Always. They weren't always the easiest or most comfortable choices for me, but you were my absolute priority, Melissa. And I never regretted it, not even in moments when you despised me or treated me as inferior. It was an emotional story, sharing all that. Painful, but also cathartic in some strange way, like finally shining a light on dark corners that had stayed unlit too long. We also talked about practical next steps, because exposing Catherine had been necessary, but didn't solve the real financial problems Melissa and Aaron faced. You need professional help to reorganize finances. Not me making loans that would only delay the inevitable, I explained firmly. Maintaining the boundary I'd established, even facing apologies and regret. There are financial consultants specialized in debt recovery, budget restructuring. That's where you need to start. Making intelligent and responsible choices, instead of following shortcuts promising quick wealth but delivering only more problems. Aaron agreed immediately, clearly willing to do whatever necessary to get out of that hole they dug following wrong guidance. And maybe it's time to sell that apartment that's above our real means and find something more modest, more adequate to what we can pay without constant stress, he suggested. And I saw the old Aaron thaw. Sensible guy Melissa had met before. Catherine's influence distorted everything finally emerging again. When we said goodbye that night, it was past midnight, and we were all emotionally exhausted from the weight of that unforgettable dinner. But there was something different in the air, something lighter despite the intensity of everything revealed and discussed. Melissa hugged me at the restaurant door, a true and tight hug like she hadn't given me in years, and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom. Thank you for loving me enough to do something so difficult and necessary." I returned the hug, feeling that maternal connection that had been so damaged, slowly beginning to heal. It wouldn't be overnight, I knew that. Years of hurt and distrust don't disappear with a single night of revelations. no matter how impactful, but for the first time in a long time, I felt real hope that we could rebuild something solid and true between. Catherine's mask had fallen, yes, but more important than that, Melissa's eyes had finally opened to see who was always genuinely on her side. In the taxi, back to the hotel, I looked through the window at Los Angeles lights passing quickly while processing everything that had happened that memorable and transformative night. It had been brutal, confrontational, and probably destroyed relationships within the Thompson family in ways that would take years to heal, if they'd heal at all. But it had been necessary. Catherine needed to be exposed to stop causing damage, not just to my relationship with Melissa, but also to their financial and emotional. And my ungrateful daughter, no, I couldn't call her that anymore after that night. My daughter finally saw the truth. Finally understood that real success isn't measured in designer bags or luxury apartments, but in character, sacrifice, unconditional love that perseveres even when not valued. She understood now that I had built something great. I'd built a life for her, with solid foundations of real opportunities and genuine love. And no gold digger and manipulative mother-in-law could erase or diminish that, no matter how many elaborate lies she told. Sometimes, truth hurts more than any lie, but it's only through it that we can truly free ourselves and rebuild what was broken. That night, I didn't just destroy Catherine's Fezadai, rescued my daughter from an illusion consuming her future. And I learned that true love sometimes means making difficult choices, confronting painful situations, and having courage to show reality even when it would be easier to simply stay silent. Today, my relationship with Melissa is being rebuilt, brick by brick, with respect, honesty, and mutual recognition. Because in the end, what really matters isn't the appearances we maintain, but the truths we live. And have you been through something similar? Have you ever felt belittled by someone you love? Or know someone maintaining appearances while sinking in real problems? How would you react if you discovered a close person is living an elaborate lie? Tell me here in the comments. I really want to know your story and your opinion about all this. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to not miss other emotional stories that bring life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships. Each story I share here is a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, is always worth more than the prettiest lie. Until the next story.